Oh, cool. We're here.
We're here.
Sweet. I thought we were gonna do some of our intro, but hey, why not? Let's just do it live. Hey all, it's Shed. I'm with Greg Larkin. Greg is in Brooklyn. I'm at my home in Toronto, and I will be coming to New York on November 6th to join Greg to launch this thing called Speak Up Culture. And so we thought, proof of book. Greg is, Greg is in New York, so I'm coming down. And we thought we would hop on and just chat for a few minutes. So if you are here and in the comments, please hop in. Let us know where you're joining us from. Say hello. Please add your comments and questions as we go. Greg, first and foremost, I know in your promotion of this live, this book was literally aflamed and on fire, which I'm like, I don't know how I feel about that. But I want to say that we do not condone book burning. It was provocative marketing.
It depends on the book.
Fair. Greg, how are you? And cast a vision, and let's have some fun here and look forward to seeing the comments fill in.
Yeah, I'm doing great. And I am so happy to be doing this, Shed, because I have so many questions for you about this book. The book's awesome. I think it is an overdue conversation about how to build a culture of courage in a place which has a culture of fear. I think that's very often you hear a lot more about how disruptive AI is going to be, or how this new agile framework is going to move mountains, or whatever. And all of those are completely dormant assets in the absence of fear, of courage.
Yeah.
And without the ability to speak up, and without the ability to sort of circumvent the hierarchy of an organization or an institution. So
totally.
The book came out not a minute too soon, and I'm fired up about it. So congratulations. Let's start there.
Thank you very, very much. That's very kind and appreciated. And yeah, I mean, everything you just said, yes. If it weren't for fear, we wouldn't have need for courage. It's not like fear bad, courage good. It's contextual, and fear is biological. Like, it serves a purpose. So thank you very much.
Yeah. Shed, what's the greatest act of courage you've ever experienced or witnessed in your career?
I have a couple that spring to mind, and they're both personal. So, like, I write about Ed Pearson in the book, who spoke up at Boeing. That's a big one.
Sure.
I reference some very well-known cases in the book, but there are two stories that come to mind. One where it went well, and one where it went horribly wrong. The one where it went well, I was on a team. I was very much in the middle of middle management, and a peer who was at the same level that I was in, he had been on this team since the very inception. And we both saw something where we both felt that a member of the team was being mistreated and not fairly judged, and like was really giving it their all, and wasn't having a great relationship with their leader. And instead of their leader advocating for them, their leader was kind of blaming them. And so we felt that the leadership team was getting one version of the story, whereas our experience was this person was awesome, hardworking, and had a really disorganized leader, and a leader who wasn't leading them well. And so we sort of saw the writing on the wall that if this were to continue, our team member was probably going to be let go. And we didn't want that, because she was an amazing team member. And so sort of, I know one of the things that we've discussed in the past is that courage has company. And so I didn't want to speak up on my own, but because we agreed to speak up together, and we literally wrote an email together. Fortunately, it came from his email address and not mine, but we signed it from both of us, and we sent it to the leaders of the company. And we were invited to join the leadership team meeting the next week, and we shared our concerns, and it was received extremely well.
Hmm.
And yeah, the senior leadership team felt like the message we got back was, "Thank you for caring about our culture as much as we do." It was like, wow. And that one interaction actually had me speak up more and encourage the people around me to speak up more with tact and respect and decency and all the good things. Um, and then I've also seen experiences where folks speak up, think that they're doing the right thing, and end up being punished, and which is a great way to create a culture of silence.
What made you think you would did you think you would be successful when you spoke up in that way? And if so, why?
I had doubts. I actually didn't think we were going to be successful. I didn't think we would get in trouble, but I thought we were going to be told why we were wrong or that we weren't seeing the full picture. And it wasn't meant that way. And things did improve for a period of time. I'm not going to say because we spoke up, but I think we contributed positively, quite positively, to a better outcome. So yeah, I didn't go in being like, this is gonna go great. I went in being like, um, I don't think this is gonna go so well. Um, yeah.
I every time I'm thinking of a bunch of different instances, but it usually has ended badly for me
Hmm.
when I speak up. Um, it never goes according to plan. Um, and there's a way, I guess there's a way that I've learned to do it over time where I have a little bit less invested in the outcome. But earlier in my career, so let me be very specific. Um, I'm thinking of a very specific instance where I approached someone in a very senior position at a joint venture between Google and PwC, where I was the head of strategy.
Two
And
extremely innovative companies.
one of them is very innovative. The other is a 189-year-old accounting firm.
Yes.
Um, um, and my I said, look, I'm deeply flawed and error prone. Um, but I'd be remiss if I didn't tell you what I'm seeing here. And if you wind up hating me or firing me, then I'll just have to live with those consequences.
That's a pretty good opening.
Yeah, it's like, look, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's missing information. Maybe I'm being a little bit too much of a savior. Maybe I'm stepping out of line, and okay.
Hmm.
But if I'm right, and you can tell me if I am, this is what I see and what it looks like to me, and I think to a lot of other people.
Hmm. All right. And was that around pointing out an issue or a failure in strategy, or like what was like what were you bringing, like an observation?
It was a failure in leadership. More significantly, um, it was kind of. I'm reading Walter Isaacson's biography right now of Elon Musk, and I can identify a lot of those things, and that many of the most innovative and entrepreneurial leaders I've ever worked with foment constant chaos. And in the process of cleaning up the wreckage of the chaos, it's intentional to a point, but it's also impulsive.
Mm,
And a lot of people who are very valuable get discarded in the wreckage of that. A lot
mm,
of people who are just like, you know what, I've had enough of this insanity, wind up walking out. And um, so it's more like that. It was people were being unfairly treated in a moment of intense hyperdrive chaos. and acceleration. Um, but I was also one of the few people that this specific leader respected and listened to, and I kind of had the opportunity to go out for a drink with this person and say, uh,
This is what I'm seeing.
"This is what I'm seeing, and I'm concerned about the results if it continues."
And how did that go?
Can you deal with it? That's how it went. Like, can you help smooth over the
Oh, can you deal
situation?
with
And
it?
can you be my ambassador on this? I suck. You know.
Okay.
Um,
Which is like to a point.
I guess, yeah. Um, but I think, and then earlier on in my career, I'm thinking of like one specific instance right after my startup was acquired, and someone who was a awful, 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 horrible leader who was constantly given more responsibility and more seniority, but was just incompetent from the perspective of leading people, but equally was like technically incompetent, but was outstanding at um,
Politics.
deflecting and politics. Yeah, I never understood how she gained what she did, but she was great at what she did. She was incredibly good self-preservationist. Some people just are.
Mm.
And I remember right after our acquisition, we were all on a conference call. She'd said something absolutely obnoxious, and I lost my shit. And I sent an email to our two joint CEOs saying, it's you have a responsibility when she blurts things like that out in the middle of a crowded analyst call to call that out and be a better leader and identify that it's not acceptable, stop the meeting, call it
And
out.
they
You
were in the
know,
room during that comment.
and I said, this is not the first time this has happened. It's not the first time I've called it to your attention, and my reserves of patience and tolerance for this kind of bullshit are just about fully depleted. Um, And, all I did was throw myself into the fray. Like, it was terrible. Like, nothing changed. That's not true. She did get fired about a month afterwards because she plagiarized some research from Goldman Sachs and thought she could get away with it. But, yeah,
But
I don't
you
know.
you felt extricated, like you felt like the old gazelle pushed to the outer rims of the pack after that.
No, not necessarily, but what I felt was that I allowed myself to get swept up in it. In other
Like,
words, the right thing to have done would have just been, like, exactly how I would handled it later on, like, 12 years later, was like, "Hey, I don't know if I'm stepping out of line or whatever. I'm just gonna offer this observation, and if you need to fire me for it, then, I'm prepared to live with the consequences." So, here it goes. Here's what I saw.
yeah,
Completely calm, but also deferential, also diplomatic. You're smarter than me and more powerful than me for good reason. And
this is what I see.
to the extent that my observations are valuable, this is what I'm observing and what I would do differently.
Which, by the way, you're allowed to have an emotional, visceral response and not react from that place and scream into a pillow or go out onto the streets of New York and scream there where it's very normal. Um,
I do that all
and
the time. I'm that guy on the subway platform.
yeah, and then and then once you've gotten that out, then it's like, okay, I can look at this more objectively and calmly and still speak up. So the interesting thing, this didn't make it into the book, and I've called it like a speak up sweet spot. So there's a spectrum of speaking up. In the middle, there's this sweet spot where it's productive, it's calm, it's more rational.
Yeah,
You're allowed to use emotion and emotion as data, but what speaking up is not, on one end, it's not sucking up. Sucking up is like, oh, speaking up is rewarded here, so I'm just gonna do it all the time to be seen as. That's not
sure.
speaking up, that's hogging air. And then on the other side, speaking up is not a jerk hall pass. Like,
Yeah.
it's not permission to be disrespectful. Uh, and I mean, those two experiences that you cited, I thought your intent, I know your intent was positive. Now, leaders have to notice, okay, is someone speaking up with a positive intent and it's hard for them and it takes courage? And sure, can I coach them a little bit on their behavior,
Yeah.
impact, timing? Yes. But if you punish folks for speaking up with positive intent because they didn't do it perfectly or at the right time or in the right way, you still might silence them. And so it's still around um yeah, it's not licensed to be an absolute prick. Uh but leaders need to look at what's the intent of this. Is this a team focused move? If it is, reward that intent, even if the behavior and impact could be improved.
Shed. In
Yes.
real life,
Uh huh.
cowardice is just as contagious as courage.
Mm-hmm.
In a culture of fear, one person's fear is going to get somebody else to be fearful and act in fearful ways.
Mm-hmm.
All of us have these superhero visions of ourselves when faced with adversity or abuse,
Mm.
and they never come true when we're in
Seldom.
those situations, almost
Yeah.
never.
Yeah.
Um, and I would argue that fear is a stronger, like, biopsychological reaction sometimes than courage.
Sure.
Fright versus fight is, you know.
Yep.
Um, so given that, like, it's not an easy thing. You're gonna be in situations where you are, like, emotionally hijacked. You're gonna be in situations where everyone around you is not willing to join you. There will be moments of extreme isolation. Most missionaries get shot. Most whistleblowers get fired and don't get celebrated. Um, One of the first things I experienced in my career is I was one of the first people to predict the subprime mortgage crisis, and the first thing that happened was that the House counsel from Lehman Brothers threatened to sue me personally.
Yep.
Um, that wasn't courage at that time. It felt like I was really dumb
Mm.
and really terrified.
Yeah.
So how do you build the scaffolding for courage in the face of contagious cowardice?
Oh, so good. Um, and how prophetic, by the way, at Lehman. And by the way, if you are here with us, please hop into the chat and let us know that you're here and where you're from, and if you have questions or comments for us in this brief live. So, I think seldom, if ever, is the experience that folks' natural reaction is courage. Um, we laud the fearless leader. We say this is our fearless leader. Like, fearless leader? Like, really? Like, are they are they not human? Like, fear is a human response. And I mean, there are fearless leaders. They're just destructive and dangerous because they're not
Yeah.
using their fear as data. Um, Fear is data which ought to be used as a risk modulator. So if you truly come across a fearless leader, like, separate yourself from them because they are destructive. Um, for most all of us, I think our initial response is fear. Fear is emotional data to say fight, flight, or freeze. Freeze, I think, is an oscillation between fight and flight. We're just making up, right? Um, so so yes, and then the leaders among us use fear as data and then press on. And then they make a decision based on that of like, well, does it make sense to move forward or should we actually move back and out? Um, so your question that is if courage is contagious, which I believe it is, cowardice is also contagious, which I believe it is. Um, and so why would courage be contagious, and how and why? and why would cowardice be contagious, and how and why? First and foremost, I think the size of a group gets bigger, it's a lot easier to hide. There's a bias of around, well, someone else will speak up or do something about it. That bystander effect, right? Um, uh, Oftentimes, it's said like, oh, that's just the way that leader is, and we can't change them. So in our cultures, we get the behavior we reward, and we get the behavior that we tolerate. Courage as well would be contagious, particularly if it's someone quite senior who displays it. I think one of the things that we can do to encourage more courage is not to lie about how we feel, but to actually embrace how we feel, vulnerability. And for a leader to say, this is hard, or I have fear around this, but to speak it out loud and choose to pursue and press on anyway, I think can create a lot more courage. Um, I think cowardice is silence, and cowardice is kissing up. And courage is speaking truth and encouraging others to do it as well and rewarding them for it.
Do you have
Um,
to have an explicit mandate or an explicit understanding that you're willing to lose your job? I mean that, honestly. Like,
in order what? To speak up or have courage?
yeah, you mentioned the guy at Boeing.
Hmm.
Um, it's
Yeah,
not
Ed.
easy being that person,
No.
and it often doesn't go well.
Yep. Yep.
Um, how do you have to have this understanding right out of the gate, which is, if
Mm.
doing the right thing means I suffer the consequences and I can't be here, then I'm willing to suffer those consequences.
So there's an attribute that my buddy Rich Davini, who wrote the book The Attributes, he's a retired SEAL. He writes about an attribute called self-efficacy, which is kind of like confidence. Like it's a belief that like no matter what, I'll be okay. I'm thinking of one client that I work with who's a director level at a big, large company. She is the most self-efficacious person that I know. Like she's like, I don't need this job. She's like, I can get a job wherever I want. I'll be okay.
But
And
most of
like,
us do. Like, most of us have mortgages and bills and
right.
need the money, and
And so
like,
does she. So does she. She has all of those things, but she's just extremely confident in herself. They're like, if it doesn't work out here, it's kind of like George Costanza breaking up with someone of like, I'll be fine, even though it's rooted in such insecurity. But like that one episode where he's like, I'm good. So she has it, and it's innate, it's real. Um, and so I think like Ed Pearson at Boeing. The reason he spoke up is not because he felt safe to do so, but he felt obligated to do so because he was
mhm.
connected to the stakes, which I'm sure, because you're a pretty smart dude. Like when you speak up, it's because I see something that's happening that is destructive to this organization or team. And I see it, I can't unsee it. So you speak up because you want the organization to thrive or do better, or not fall to a submortgage prime. So
It's a little
the
different than that even.
okay.
Um, I have a better understanding of myself today than I did back then. I know that if I'm going to work in an environment where courage is discouraged,
Hmm.
I won't be able to do good work. It will only be a matter of time before I kind of implode.
Yep.
And I don't need to wait for that to happen. And so I
Now,
am actually willing.
now that you know.
Yeah, like, I am
Yeah.
willing to lose my job.
So the question is it a requisite? Do you have to be willing to lose your job in order to speak up or have courage? I don't think it's a requisite, but it sure as hell helps. Oh, do we just lose Greg? No, you're here.
I'm here. I'm right
Yeah.
here. Yeah.
Did you hear what I said? So it's not a
Yeah.
requisite, but it helps.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. I think the vast majority of folks who have the courage to speak truth and speak up have already done the calculus in their head of this could cost me my reputation, my relationships, and my job.
Shed, if you were to fast forward to 12 months from now, and this
Hmm.
book were to have a monumental impact on executive leadership,
Mm.
how would executive leadership be different in 12
Oh.
months than it is today?
Oh, I love that question, Greg. Hey, Cheryl. Um, we'll see you in a couple weeks in New York, Cheryl. So I mean, the vision that I see that if in 12 months executives and senior leaders adopt this message, there would be a version of leadership which is far more humble, vulnerable, fallible, open, less machismo, less ego, um, and still a willingness to be decisive, still a willingness to be accountable, but a lot more credit giving, a lot more responsibility taking, and a lot more humility. And to me, humility is the awareness that you are imperfect and that
Is
you
there a
can always get
model of
better.
is there a leader that you look at, or a model of leadership that you look out at and you think it's a real shame that that is being embraced as the icon of effective CEO-ship or stewardship or leadership?
Yes, for sure. The
What
one
would you say
where
that is?
I mean, it's the one where the leader gets disproportionate credit and takes it. The leader that uses the word I, me, and my a lot more than we, us together.
Is there
You
anyone
know,
who you would call out as being, uh, an example of a negative example of that?
yes. I think the way Elon is leading right now is not particularly great. And I think that the funny thing with power, there's a brilliant and I want to ask the same question back to you, Greg, as well. But there's a brilliant article that came out of the Atlantic before the pandemic called "Power Causes Brain Damage."
I saw it, yeah,
It's
great
so good.
article.
And they literally took MRI scans of folks who had more power, and the very things that got them that position of power, empathy, sound decision making, they lost all of those things as they gained power. And there's biological reasoning, which is when you become that senior leader, we are biologically wired to offer you deference, because you have power over us. And so the greatest leaders in those seats create more informality. They surround themselves not with people who agree with everything that they say. They'll surround themselves with folks who challenge them and push them, make them more human. You know, M- um, Michelle of Barack Obama reminds him and others that indeed
Yeah,
his feet stink. You know, Winston Churchill's wife wrote him a letter saying, I fear that you have lost connection with your constituents. I don't think
mhm,
you're leading well. Like, we need to surround ourselves
sure.
with people on our team and our lives who call us on our shit. And that when they do, we listen to them, especially if it triggers us. Because if it triggers us, it means that they're probably onto something. What about you? Are there particular leaders you would call out? You're far more better at calling out than I am, or calling on to lead better.
I have 2 answers to that. Um, I don't know. This book I'm reading about Elon Musk, I gives me insane PTSD on one hand, and then on the other is like, man, am I glad that someone like that had the audacity to walk up to a company like Boeing that owned the space industry and call them on all of their waste and dogma and question every requirement, speak to every regulator, and like literally just cut the cost of space to the point where it becomes an entirely other category for civilian use because it was so inexpensive by the time SpaceX did that.
Which,
Equally
by
at
the way,
Tesla,
positive.
very
Um,
positive.
Yeah.
And I wish he was Richard Branson, who I'm also reading about. I tend to read 4 books at the same time. It's a weird thing. But I'm reading a lot about Richard Branson, who by every account is this empathetic, empowering, um, insanely curious without being judgmental, surrounds himself by people who disagree with him.
Hmm.
Um,
Seems
it's
like a good father too, a good parent from what I hear.
kind of ticks all the boxes, and so there's this
Mm.
like fine line between being a monster and a mensch. And
Yeah. But what
and
I
I
think it is, keep going.
um but on the surface they're both great entrepreneurs. And I
So
think the
this,
fact of the matter is like people look at these folks and are like billionaire,
hmm
uh totally transformative in terms of how they change the world and the impact of their work. Some could argue that the world will be a better place because of the decarbonization associated with Elon Musk's business empire relative to like Virgin.
hmm
The case could
Yeah.
be made. You know, do
Uh-huh.
we need that person to be a nice guy, or do we just need them to be a maniac? You know, and with all the emotional collateral damage from the people that were within that circuit, is that the price of making the world better?
So
I
here,
think that's a false choice.
yeah.
But it begs the question. It really does.
So, but every single human being on this earth and eventually beyond it, um, has a strength, has many strengths. But to say that we're all Swiss Army knives would be a fallacy. Some of
Sure.
us are Swiss Army knives, but like, um, so vision is not a requisite of leadership. I know visionaries who are crappy leaders, but they have
Sure.
vision. You to be a leader, you have to contribute to some sort of vision, but it doesn't need to be your own vision. And so I think if you look at these folks, I mean, I just watched Blackberry, the movie in that sort of movie documentary type thing.
Wait, do you mean about uh that
The
like the
demise of
company?
BlackBerry. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. With Jay Baruchel and um so uh so to like Elon, not a worthless human being,
Not
but
at
is he
all.
effective at being a CEO of a huge empire? Is he effective at like pushing regulators and creating more space for space? Yes. But I think we need to look at folks and go, what is their lane and how can we help them stay in that lane? And then how can we help them get out of the lanes they shouldn't be in and put folks in those lanes who can thrive? Um,
I have a different take on it than that.
okay.
I think if you are a category creator,
Mm-hmm.
electric vehicles weren't a category before Tesla really emerged. It was this science experiment, really.
Yep.
Um, Civilian space travel or a civilian space industry.
Tourism. Yeah. Yeah. Which, by the way, shouldn't be done for 13 seconds with a huge rocket. I have a buddy who's creating space tourism with a helium balloon. You just float up for 12 hours and come down.
Great.
Very little carbon impact. It's called
Wonderful.
worldview. Worldview. Yeah.
Um, Fine. But that visionariness, like maybe that it's very different because you're going to be hitting up constantly. And I experienced this when I was in a startup. Uh, we created at Innovest, my first startup, we created the category of ESG investing.
Mm-hmm.
We were under constant um, fire, constant skepticism. No one wanted us to exist. No one wanted to believe we should be taken seriously. did require me to go predict that the subprime mortgage crisis was going, well, the booming subprime mortgage market was going to collapse, and call it out and be unbelievable. I remember specifically, I'm going to give you an example of this. I was on, when my predictions started to come true, I'm being interviewed on CNBC. The interviewer said, "Who's next?" I said, "I think Washington Mutual is going to explode anytime soon." And it was being recorded for air later on. He said to his cameraman, "Cut, can you give us a second? Are you sure you want to say that?" I said, "Yeah, I want to say it. I believe it." He said, "Okay, I gave you the choice to retract. Let's go back on air. Mike, can you like flip the camera back on?" And
Were you
because no
right?
one, and yeah, Washington Mutual was dissolved. It went out of business. Um, but the expectation there, like for me in that position where you're building up a category, the expectation is that you are full of piss and vinegar.
Hmm.
You're going to constantly be in firefighting mode. Your job is to start fights. Your job is to be punk rock. And then once we got acquired, it was like, you need to extinguish that flame right now.
But,
That's
but
not
this
your job
is
anymore.
but this is the tension that exists. I mean, you have a community, it's right in your name, called Punks and Pinstripes. And so I think the thing you just pointed out is really good, which is Elon Musk is very good at creating categories.
Yeah,
So what he should do is just create categories and then keep creating categories.
sure.
Which means, by the way, when Tesla becomes blue chip, you create the next category.
Right.
That's his thing, and he navigates chaos. But what he shouldn't do is create chaos where there need not be.
Yeah. I mean, once Giuliani cleaned up the streets of New York and made it a safe, touristy city, he couldn't stop.
Yeah.
He kept making new enemies. He kept being this brawler.
And now he's a villain in a Batman movie. I mean, oh wait, sorry. But couldn't he be?
He totally could be
Yeah.
Gotham.
Love it.
All right. So should we remind people on November 6th in New York City? The Eventbrite link is in the comments section.
Thank you, LA.
November 6th from 6 to 8 p.m. In New York. One of the absolute coolest bars in the city. This weird, quirky, bizarre, awesome speakeasy. Everything you're thinking in your head about an awful networking event where people have like scrawled name tags on their shirt and they talk about nothing, and the guests who do the fireside chat have nothing to say. I want you to flip that on its head and reimagine yourself in one of the coolest speakeasies in one of the coolest cities on planet Earth, with an illustrious author, which is
Who's
Shed.
that? Oh,
You're
right.
you're the illustrious author.
Yeah. Fortunately, it's after Halloween, so I will try to dress up as an illustrious author for Halloween, and I'll just keep that costume. Greg, it is always such a joy. I love the way you think. I love the questions that you bring, and just that you and I come from such different perspectives and life experiences, but yet we meet in this middle, that I think is very complimentary. So a joy for those in New York. I hope you'll join us on the 6th. I know some of you, including Cheryl, will be traveling in. So look forward to seeing you there. And Greg, thanks for hopping on and doing this with us.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Jed.
Cheers.